I previously tested one of the cheapest new 35mm film cameras you could buy, the $35 Kodak EC35. That's a lot of 35s. Today it's going head to head against its older sibling, the $99 Kodak Snapic A1. Is the extra $65 actually worth it? If you're trying to decide between these two cameras, this video is for you. Let's talk about it. The EC35 is about as bare bones as it gets. A 25mm fixed focus lens at f10. You get a built-in flash that you can turn on and off, which can be rare at this price point. Everything else is manual. Manual film advance with a thumb wheel, manual rewind with a crank on the bottom. One battery powers the flash, and that's it. It weighs about 102 grams, which is lighter than most smartphones. It's tiny, it's discreet, and it gives you exactly one creative decision: flash or no flash. The upside? No overthinking. No light meter, no aperture to worry about, no did I nail the focus stress. F10 means I consider this basically a daylight only camera. Indoors without flash, you're starving the film for light. And the 25mm fixed focus lens means you can't get close-up detail shots without some distortion. Now, let's talk about what changes when you spend $99 instead of $35. Okay, first, the lens. The Snapic A1 also has a 25mm lens, but it's a 3-element glass lens at f9.5 instead of the EC35's plastic f10. That's a slightly wider aperture. Not a huge difference on paper, but the glass optics can affect sharpness, especially around the edges. More importantly, the Snapic A1 gives you 2-zone focus. You get a portrait setting and a landscape setting. It's not true autofocus, but it gives you more control than the EC35's fixed everything approach. Second, the film transport. The EC35 is pretty much fully manual. You thumb wheel between every shot, you crank to rewind. The Snapic A1 is automatic. It auto loads the film, auto advances after every shot, unless you're doing multiple exposure, and auto rewinds when the roll is done. For a beginner who's nervous about loading film wrong, or forgetting to advance and doing double exposure on accident, that's a real ease of use upgrade. Third, you get an OLED screen. It tells you what frame you're on, your flash status, and your battery level. With the EC35, there's simply an analog counter on the bottom of the camera to tell you how many shots you've taken, and an on and off switch with a little LED light to tell you if your flash is on. Fourth, the Snapic A1 has a multiple exposure mode. You can layer multiple images on one frame in camera. That's a creative tool the EC35 simply doesn't offer. Fifth, power. The Snapic A1's batteries are used to power everything: the flash, the screen, the auto advance. The EC35 single battery only powers the flash. The Snapic A1 is slightly heavier than the EC35. We're talking 117 grams versus 102. And the Snapic A1 is slightly more compact. But I didn't really notice any difference while shooting with these two cameras. Here's a graphic summarizing the comparisons. Okay, let's check out some of the photos so you can see some of the differences and similarities between the two cameras. So we're going to start off with the USS Wisconsin, and kind of at first glance they both look very similar as far as the lighting and the tone of the photos, but as you zoom in, I think you'll start to see some of the differences. Can you tell me which one you think is the Snapic A1 and which one you think is the EC35? Okay, so the one on the left was taken with the Snapic A1 and the one on the right was taken with the EC35. So we'll zoom in first. And we'll kind of come over some. So here's where I think you can see some strong differences between the two as far as sharpness goes. So remember, the Snapic A1 has a glass lens, and I think you can kind of see the difference between the two when you look at the kind of highlighted portions here. I do think the Snapic A1 is sharper here than the EC35 is. And then even if we go to the edges, again, I think the Snapic is sharper here than the EC35 is. But zoomed out, I don't think you can tell quite as much. Okay, so for the rest of these photos, I'm not going to make you guess which one is the Snapic A1 and which one is the EC35. Just know that the Snapic A1 will be on the left-hand side and the EC35 will be on the right. So looking at these two photos, again, I think they are very similar. I do think the EC35 is a little lighter here, and it may just be because it was a partly cloudy day, so maybe the sun was out a little bit more. but when you zoom in here, I can't really tell a major difference between the sharpness of these two images, at least in kind of the subject I was going for, which was the reflection of the ship here. If we scroll to the side, let's see. I do think you can see some difference in the sharpness when we look at these bricks, or maybe it's just the boldness and richness of the color for the brick. But I do think like the brick detail is a little more sharp, and this little light fixture here is sharper with Snapic A1 than the brick and this light feature here with the Kodak EC35. I don't think it's a major difference, but I do think it is a little bit more blurry here. But you guys let me know what you think. All right, so here's the next photo, and I think you can clearly see the one on the left looks sharper than the one on the right. However, it was really humid outside this day, and I noticed probably about halfway through the rolls of film that there was condensation like surrounding the lens area for the EC35, and so I think the mistiness of this photo as compared to this one is partially due to that humidity. So you'll see a couple photos like this, and I have some that are more extreme, and I do think that shows value, at least in the fact that, okay, you know, on super humid days, you need to be cognizant of that humidity piece and the potential misting effect it can have on the lens, and just keep your eye out for it. Like I said, I didn't really notice until about halfway through the roll, but I didn't want to do too much with it. So it kind of is what it is. But you can see there is, again, this kind of misty look to this image as opposed to the Snapic A1s. And it does look a little lighter here, I think. If we zoom in, let's zoom into the edge. First, zoom into his face. Is that 3? There we go. Even with the misting, I still feel like the EC35 is less sharp than the Snapic A1, because like you can see the misting, kind of like the halo effect around the statue, but even his face doesn't look as sharp. So again, I might have to go back and take some pictures with the EC35 when it's not quite as humid to see if it is still as soft looking as it looks now. And then for these photos, this is just another example of what I was talking about the misting piece. This is clearly, the Snapic A1 is clearly sharper looking than the EC35. However, I actually do like kind of this misty look for this photo here. It gives it kind of a dreamy effect. I will say also that the colors do look richer for the Snapic A1 than the EC35, but again, that could be due to the misting piece. So here is a photo that I took without flash in a more shaded area. It was actually pretty dark for like being outside when I took a picture of this mermaid here. And so here, I don't think you can see the misting effect as much. It literally is just darker. But I do think here is where you kind of see some of the difference between the f9.5 of the Snapic A1 and the f10 of the EC35. And neither, you know, photo is super clear or anything, but like the words here, let's zoom in. Are clearer here than they are here. You can still see some of the misting, I think, but overall I don't think you can tell as much as in like the direct sunlight. So here's a set of photos where I don't think the misting is as strong for the EC35. And again, I think they look very similar, but here I think if I zoom in, let's see, if we zoom in to the photo or to the mirror reflection here, I think they're actually pretty similar. It actually looks like for this one, the Snapic A1 is more blurry than the EC35. Like here, you can kind of see it looks more grainy, but to me, it still looks clearer and sharper than it does on this side here. And so it may have just been user error. I may have just moved too quickly for the Snapic A1 because I think it only has a shutter speed of 1/100th of a second, which isn't slow by any means, but it's not necessarily fast. And so also if we zoom out or zoom back in and over, zoom over, again, it looks less sharp for the Snapic A1 over here than I think it does for the EC35. So again, this might just be a user error and then I moved too quickly, but I didn't have that same issue here for the EC35. All right, so this will probably be the last photo I discuss for this video. But again, I do think, kind of like what we've been seeing, the Snapic A1 is slightly sharper than the EC35. Let's zoom in. We'll go to the building. And so I do think you can tell there is a sharpness difference between these two images in this section here. Yes, it may have a little bit to do with the humidity and like the mistiness getting on the EC35's lens, but overall, I don't think that mistiness is so strong that you can't see the difference in like the sharpness just overall between these two images. Because again, the mistiness to me looks more grainy, not necessarily less sharp. But yeah, those are just some of the comparison photos between these two cameras. I am a little disappointed that the humidity got to the EC35 lens so much, because I think it kind of skews the results from this kind of test a little bit in the Snapic A1's favor. But even in the beginning, I did think the Snapic A1 took, sharper photos. So I think that's kind of the overall theme you'll get between these two cameras. Yes, they're very similar, but the Snapic A1, generally speaking, will probably take slightly sharper photos because of the glass lens than the EC35's plastic lens. And then, like I said, I also think it's something to be aware of and something I would not have discovered if I did not go shooting on this super hot and humid day. So hopefully that is a useful tip for those of you who also live in hot and humid places. Okay, so here's the question I came to answer. Is the Snapic A1 worth the extra $65 over the Kodak EC35? And the honest answer is, it depends on what you're looking for. So let me break it down. If you're a complete beginner who is nervous about wasting film because you accidentally mess up the loading process or not rewinding the film all the way, the Snapic A1 is actually the easier camera to start with. Auto load, auto advance, auto rewind. 3 of the biggest beginner failure points are just handled for you. If you want the fewest ways to mess up a roll of film, spend the extra $65. Now, if you're a beginner who wants to learn the mechanics of film photography, if you want to understand what it feels like to load and advance film, to crank a rewind lever, to be in full control of that process, then the EC35 is your camera. At $35, it's a low-risk classroom. It will teach you things the Snapic A1 handles automatically in the background. If you're an intermediate film photographer, you've shot a few rolls, you understand basics, and you want a pocketable everyday carry camera, this is where it can get kind of interesting. To me, the EC35 is more fun. The mechanical feel, the flash control, the sheer simplicity. There's kind of a purity to it. But the Snapic A1's glass lens, 2-zone focus, and multiple exposure modes give you room to grow. You have a better shot of taking some sharper portraits, you can experiment with layering images. The Snapic A1 just gives you room to grow that the EC35 can't. If you consider yourself a relatively experienced, film photographer, you shoot manual SLR like a Canon AE1 or Pentax K1000, and you want a grab-and-go backup, honestly, I think either one works. I lean towards the EC35 because there's no real thought required. It's cheaper, I love the color options, and I like the fact that it has a sliding door to cover the lens. The Snapic A1 calls for a little more thought, not much, so it would also make a great grab-and-go camera. So here's the bottom line. The EC35 is not half the camera at a third of the price. It's a different camera for a different mindset. The Snapic A1 is not overpriced. You are getting real, meaningful upgrades for your $65. A better lens, smarter film handling, and more creative options, and fewer ways to mess up. If I had to pick one for a friend who's just starting out and wants the safest entry point, I'd tell them to spend the extra $65 on the Snapic A1. If I had to pick one for a friend who wants to feel more connected to the mechanics of film photography and doesn't mind some limitations, the EC35, no question. And if you're still on the fence, honestly, $135 will get you both, and then you never have to wonder. So that's the Kodak Snapic A1 versus the Kodak EC35. 2 budget Kodaks, one $65 question. Now I want to hear from you. Which one would you pick? The bare bones $35 EC35 or the more feature-packed $99 Snapic A1. And if you own either one, drop your experience in the comments below. If you enjoyed this comparison, drop a like. It genuinely does help my channel. And if you're into honest film and instant camera reviews without the gatekeeping, hit that subscribe button. I drop new videos every week. Next time, keep practicing, keep having fun, and I'll see you in the next video.